The sound of Elijah's body hitting the concrete sent a collective gasp through the crowd at Maple Street's annual block party. Children's laughter died instantly. Grills sizzled unattended. Cell phones emerged from pockets like weapons drawn for battle. HOA Cops stood over the 11-year-old boy, his security badge gleaming in the afternoon sun, his face twisted with a satisfaction that made nearby parents instinctively pull their children closer. "I told you to move," he snarled, his voice carrying across the silent street. "Disabled don't mean you can't follow orders." Elijah's left leg, already weakened from cerebral palsy, bent at an unnatural angle beneath him. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to push himself up with trembling arms. His red baseball cap had flown off during the fall, revealing the surgical scar that ran along his temple from a procedure he'd endured 2 years earlier. "Please," Elijah whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant hum of traffic. "I was just trying to get to my mom." 20 minutes earlier, Maple Street had been alive with the kind of community spirit that made small-town America feel like a Norman Rockwell painting. Smoke rose from a dozen backyard grills. Children chased each other between folding tables laden with potato salad and corn on the cob. The Martinez family had set up a bounce house. The Johnsons were running their annual pie contest. Elijah had been sitting on a lawn chair near the Thompson family's table, watching his younger sister Maya play hopscotch with 3 other girls. His mother, Dr. Sarah Williams, was helping organize the dessert table, while his father was at the fire station, covering an emergency shift that had stretched longer than expected. "You want some lemonade, baby?" his mother had called out, her voice warm with the kind of maternal affection that made other parents smile knowingly. "Yes, please," Elijah had replied, attempting to stand with the careful deliberation that characterized all his movements. His left leg required extra attention, extra time, extra patience from a world that rarely offered any of the three. That's when HOA Cops had appeared. The man worked security for various events around the city, though nobody could quite remember who had hired him for the block party. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of aggressive demeanor that made people cross the street to avoid him. His uniform was crisp, but generic, the kind purchased online rather than issued by any legitimate organization. "You're blocking the walkway," HOA Cops had announced, materializing beside Elijah's chair like a storm cloud. Elijah had looked up, confusion evident in his dark eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just sitting here." "Don't give me that attitude, boy. Move along." Several nearby adults had glanced over, their conversations faltering as they sensed tension brewing. Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 houses down, had set down her paper plate and taken a step closer. Tom Rodriguez, the mailman who'd been delivering to this neighborhood for 15 years, had paused in his conversation with the Williams family. "I'm waiting for my mom," Elijah had explained, his voice small but polite. "She's right over there." HOA Cops had leaned down, his face inches from Elijah's. "I don't care if you're waiting for the president. You're in the way, and you need to move, now." The confrontation had escalated with breathtaking speed. When Elijah had attempted to stand, his natural slowness had apparently infuriated HOA Cops further. "Stop faking that limp," the man had snarled. "I see kids like you all the time, pretending to be disabled for attention." Dr. Williams had heard the commotion and was already moving toward them, her face tight with the kind of controlled anger that came from years of dealing with ignorance about her son's condition. "Excuse me," she had called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Is there a problem here?" HOA Cops had straightened, his eyes narrowing as he took in the approaching woman. Your boy here is causing trouble, ma'am. Refusing to move when asked politely. He's 11 years old and has cerebral palsy, Dr. Williams had replied, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. He needs extra time to move, and he wasn't bothering anyone. That's what they all say, HOA Cops had muttered, just loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. Excuses for bad behavior. The moment had stretched taut, like a rubber band about to snap. Elijah had finally managed to stand, his leg trembling with effort, his face flushed with embarrassment. He'd taken one careful step toward his mother when HOA Cops had made his move. I said move faster, the man had growled, placing a heavy hand on Elijah's shoulder and shoving him forward. The boy's compromised balance had made the fall inevitable. He'd stumbled, his left leg buckling, his arms windmilling as he'd tried to catch himself. The concrete had welcomed him with unforgiving hardness. Now, as Elijah lay on the ground, the neighborhood block party had transformed into something else entirely. Mrs. Chen was already on her phone, her voice sharp as she spoke to what sounded like a 911 dispatcher. Tom Rodriguez was recording everything with his smartphone, his face grim with determination. Get away from him, Doctor, Williams commanded, dropping to her knees beside her son. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for injuries while her eyes blazed with fury. Don't you dare touch him again! HOA Cops crossed his arms, apparently oblivious to the dozen phones now pointed in his direction. The boy needed to learn respect. Maybe next time he'll listen when an adult tells him to move. He's a child, shouted Mrs. Patterson from across the street, her voice cracking with emotion. A disabled child. What is wrong with you? The crowd was growing, neighbors emerging from their homes drawn by the commotion. The Martinez children had stopped playing and were staring wide-eyed at the scene. Little Maya had begun crying, her hopscotch game forgotten as she ran to her mother and brother. Mama, is Elijah okay? Maya asked, her small voice barely audible above the growing murmur of outraged voices. Dr. Williams helped her son sit up, noting with relief that he didn't appear to have suffered any fractures. But the psychological damage was evident in his eyes, the way he flinched when shadows fell across him, the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid. I'm going to call the police, announced Mr. Garcia, the neighborhood's unofficial organizer. This is assault on a minor. HOA Cops laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Call whoever you want. I was doing my job, keeping the peace. Kid was being disruptive. Disruptive. Mrs. Thompson's voice rose to a near shriek. He was sitting in a chair, waiting for his mother. How is that disruptive? The security guard's face had taken on a defensive cast, but his words remained inflammatory. These people always play the victim, always have an excuse. Kid probably isn't even really disabled. The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. Someone in the back called out, "You're sick, man. Seriously sick." Dr. Williams helped Elijah to his feet, her arm around his waist for support. Come on, baby. Let's get you some ice for your knee. As they moved slowly toward the Williams family's front porch, HOA Cops made another critical error. Running away, he called after them. That's what I thought. All talk, no action. The provocation worked. Dr. Williams turned back, her eyes blazing. You want to see action? You just assaulted my son in front of dozens of witnesses. You'll be hearing from our lawyer. Good luck with that, HOA Cops replied, his confidence apparently unshaken. I know people in this city. Know people who matter. What he didn't know was that one of those people who mattered was currently racing toward Maple Street in a red pickup truck. His shift at the fire station cut short by an urgent phone call from his wife. Chief Marcus Williams had been reviewing incident reports when his phone had buzzed with a text message that made his blood run cold. His wife's message had been brief but devastating. Elijah attacked at block party. Come home now. The fire chief had been with the department for 22 years, rising through the ranks through a combination of skill, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to community service. He'd saved lives, fought fires, and earned the respect of everyone from the mayor to the newest volunteer firefighter. He'd also spent the last 11 years learning patience from his son, discovering reserves of strength he'd never known he possessed as he watched Elijah navigate a world that wasn't built for children like him. As Chief Williams's truck turned onto Maple Street, the scene before him crystallized into sharp focus. His son was sitting on their front porch, ice pack pressed to his knee, tears still visible on his face. His wife was pacing nearby, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in the clipped tones she used when her professional composure was barely containing her rage. And in the middle of the street, surrounded by angry neighbors, stood a man in a security uniform who was apparently unaware that his life was about to change forever. Chief Williams parked his truck and stepped out, his 6'3" frame commanding immediate attention. He was still wearing his department uniform, the chief's badge catching the afternoon sunlight. Every conversation died as he walked across the street toward the crowd. "Daddy," Maya called out, running to meet him. "A bad man hurt Elijah." The fire chief scooped up his daughter with one arm, while his eyes remained fixed on HOA Cops. "I know, sweetheart. Daddy's going to take care of it." Mrs. Chen approached him, her face flushed with indignation. "Chief Williams, I filmed the whole thing. That man shoved Elijah to the ground for no reason. Called him a faker." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Chen," Chief Williams replied, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Would you mind sending me that video?" HOA Cops had finally noticed the tall man in the fire department uniform, but he still hadn't made the connection. "You another one of these bleeding hearts?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Kid was causing trouble, and I dealt with it." Chief Williams set Maya down gently and walked closer to the security guard. "Is that right? Tell me exactly what kind of trouble an 11-year-old boy with cerebral palsy was causing." "He was blocking the walkway, giving me attitude when I told him to move. These kids today have no respect for authority." The fire chief nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Authority. That's interesting. What kind of authority do you represent? Exactly?" HOA Cops straightened, apparently sensing an opportunity to establish dominance. "I'm licensed security. I keep the peace at events like this. Part of my job is dealing with troublemakers." "Troublemakers," Chief Williams repeated, his voice so quiet that people strained to hear him. "You're telling me you consider a disabled child sitting in a chair at a neighborhood barbecue to be a troublemaker?" "I'm telling you that kid needed to learn some respect. And if his parents had taught him properly, I wouldn't have needed to step in." The crowd was growing restless, voices rising in anger. Tom Rodriguez had moved closer with his phone, making sure he captured every word. "Mrs. Patterson was shaking her head in disgust. Chief Williams pulled out his own phone and began recording. "I want to make sure I have this right. You're claiming that you were justified in physically assaulting a child because he didn't move fast enough to suit you." HOA Cops was beginning to look uncomfortable, but his belligerence remained intact. I didn't assault anyone. I gave the kid a little push to get him moving. If he can't handle that, maybe he shouldn't be out in public." The gasps from the crowd were audible. Someone shouted, "Are you hearing this? Are you actually hearing this?" Chief Williams continued recording, his voice steady. "So you believe that disabled children don't belong in public spaces?" "I believe that parents need to keep their problem children under control," HOA Cops replied, apparently unaware that he was digging his own grave with every word. That's when Chief Williams decided to reveal his hand. "The problem child you're referring to is my son." The silence that followed was deafening. HOA Cops' face went through a series of changes, from confusion to recognition to what might have been the beginning of panic. "Your son," he repeated, his voice noticeably smaller than it had been moments earlier. "My son," Chief Williams confirmed, his phone still recording. "Elijah Williams, 11 years old, honor roll student, volunteer at the animal shelter, loves baseball even though he can't run the bases like other kids, and the target of your unprovoked attack." The crowd was murmuring now, cell phones emerging as people began sharing the video footage they'd captured. Social media posts were already going live, accompanied by hashtags that would soon be trending citywide. HOA Cops tried to recover, but his bluster had evaporated. "Look, I didn't know he was your kid. If you had known what," Chief Williams interrupted, "that attacking him would have consequences, that he had a father who would hold you accountable. What difference should that make?" The security guard's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Around him, the crowd was growing larger and more agitated. Someone had called the police, and sirens could be heard in the distance. "The difference," Chief Williams continued, his voice carrying across the street, "is that you thought you could hurt a child and walk away. You thought there would be no consequences for your actions. You thought wrong." Dr. Williams had joined the group, her arm around Elijah's shoulders, as he leaned against her for support. "He's been receiving physical therapy for 6 years, she said, her voice thick with emotion. 6 years of hard work to build the strength and coordination you destroyed in 10 seconds. The police cars were pulling up now, their red and blue lights adding an official gravity to the scene. Officer Jennifer Martinez, who had been patrolling the area, stepped out of her vehicle and immediately recognized Chief Williams. "Chief," she said, her voice professional but concerned, "we received reports of an assault." Chief Williams gestured toward HOA Cops, who was looking increasingly desperate. "Officer Martinez, I'd like to file a complaint for assault on a minor. My son was attacked by this man while sitting peacefully at our neighborhood barbecue." Officer Martinez looked at HOA Cops, then at the crowd of angry neighbors, then at the multiple phones still recording the scene. "Sir, I need to see your identification and any permits you have for security work at this event." HOA Cops fumbled for his wallet, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't need permits. I'm independent security." Independent security, working without permits or oversight. Officer Martinez noted, making notes in her book. "Who hired you for this event?" The question hung in the air like a sword. HOA Cops' face revealed the truth before his mouth did. "I was just keeping the peace. Saw trouble and dealt with it." "So nobody hired you," Chief Williams said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You took it upon yourself to attack my son." The crowd was pressing closer now, their anger palpable. "Mrs. Chen stepped forward with her phone. "Officer Martinez, I have video of the entire incident. This man shoved an 11-year-old child to the ground and called him a faker. Several other neighbors offered their own footage, creating a comprehensive record of the assault. Officer Martinez reviewed one of the videos, her face growing grimmer with each passing second. "Sir," she said to HOA Cops, "you're under arrest for assault on a minor. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, HOA Cops made one final desperate attempt to justify his actions. "This is ridiculous. I was just doing what needed to be done. Kid was being disruptive." Chief Williams stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The only disruptive element here was you, and now you're going to face the consequences of your actions." The arrest was swift and professional, but the aftermath would stretch far beyond Maple Street. Chief Williams had already begun forwarding the video footage to local news stations, his social media posts reaching his extensive network of first responders and community leaders. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by Channel 7 News. Reporter Jessica Chen, no relation to the neighbor who had first filmed the incident, arrived on Maple Street with a camera crew in tow. "This is Jessica Chen, reporting live from Maple Street, where a shocking incident has rocked this quiet neighborhood," she began, her voice carrying the gravity reserved for breaking news. Video footage shows a security guard attacking an 11-year-old disabled child at a community barbecue, apparently unaware that the child's father is the city's fire chief. The footage played on television screens across the city, each viewing sparking fresh outrage. Social media exploded with commentary. Hashtags like "Justice for Elijah" and "Protect Our Children" trending within hours. Chief Williams had decided to go live on his own social media accounts, sitting on his front porch with Elijah beside him, the boy's injured leg propped up on a cushion. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I want to talk to you about what happened here today, and about the bigger issues it represents." The live stream attracted thousands of viewers within minutes, the comments section flowing with messages of support and outrage. "My son Elijah is 11 years old," Chief Williams continued, his hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. "He has cerebral palsy, which affects his mobility and coordination. He's also one of the bravest, kindest, most determined kids I've ever known." Elijah looked up at his father with adoration, his earlier trauma temporarily forgotten in the warmth of paternal love. Today, at our neighborhood barbecue, a man who had no authority, no training, and no excuse decided that my son didn't belong in public spaces, Chief Williams said, his voice growing stronger. "He physically attacked an 11-year-old child for the crime of existing while disabled." The comments were pouring in now, people sharing their own experiences with discrimination and violence. Parents of disabled children recounted similar incidents. Community leaders expressed their outrage and support. "This isn't just about Elijah," Chief Williams continued. "This is about every child who has ever been told they don't belong. Every disabled person who has been treated as less than human. Every family that has watched their loved ones suffer because of ignorance and hatred." The live stream was being shared across multiple platforms, reaching audiences far beyond the city limits. News outlets were picking up the story, and calls for justice were growing louder by the hour. But the most powerful moment came when Elijah himself spoke, his young voice carrying a wisdom born of experience with adversity. "I just want people to know that being disabled doesn't make you bad," he said, looking directly into the camera. "It just makes you different. And different isn't scary." The simplicity and truth of his words resonated with viewers around the world. By the end of the evening, the video had been viewed over 1 million times, and the story had become a national conversation about disability rights and community responsibility. The next morning brought consequences for HOA Cops that extended far beyond his arrest. The security company he occasionally worked for issued a statement disavowing his actions and confirming his immediate termination from their contractor list. His business license was under review by the state regulatory board. But the real reckoning came at the emergency city council meeting, called in response to the public outcry. The chambers were packed with residents, disability advocates, and community leaders demanding action. Mayor Patricia Gonzalez, who had worked closely with Chief Williams on numerous city initiatives, took the podium with a gravity that silenced the room. Yesterday, our community witnessed an act of violence against a child that shocks the conscience, she began, her voice carrying across the packed chamber. An act that reveals the work we still have to do to create a truly inclusive society. The applause was thunderous, but the mayor raised her hand for silence. We cannot undo what happened to Elijah Williams, but we can ensure that it never happens again. The mayor announced a comprehensive review of security protocols at city events, mandatory training for all security personnel on disability awareness, and the establishment of a community oversight board to monitor future incidents. Chief Williams spoke next, his uniform bearing the weight of his 22 years of service. My son didn't choose to be disabled, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. But he chose to be brave. He chose to be kind. He chose to see the best in people, even after experiencing the worst. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. If we want to honor Elijah and children like him, we don't just need better security protocols. Chief Williams continued, we need to examine our hearts. We need to ask ourselves how we treat the vulnerable members of our community when no one is watching. The speech was interrupted by sustained applause, but Chief Williams wasn't finished. My son's disability is not a tragedy, he said, his voice rising with passion. The tragedy is a world that sees children like him as problems to be solved, rather than people to be celebrated. When Elijah himself took the podium, assisted by his father, the room fell completely silent. His small frame was dwarfed by the official setting, but his voice carried with surprising strength. I want to thank everyone for standing up for me, he said, his words carefully chosen. But I also want to say that I'm not angry at the man who hurt me. I'm sad for him, because he doesn't know how much joy he's missing by not being friends with people like me. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire chamber rose to its feet, applauding not just for Elijah's words, but for the grace and wisdom he displayed in the face of injustice. The meeting concluded with the unanimous passage of the Elijah Williams Community Safety Act, establishing new standards for event security and creating protected spaces for vulnerable community members. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the transformation of Maple Street itself. The neighborhood that had witnessed an act of cruelty became a symbol of community resilience and love. Mrs. Chen organized a follow-up block party, this one specifically designed to celebrate inclusivity and accessibility. Ramps were installed. Sensory-friendly spaces were created. Every activity was designed to accommodate children and adults with various abilities. The event drew hundreds of attendees from across the city, including families who had never felt welcome at community gatherings before. Children with disabilities played alongside their non-disabled peers, their laughter echoing through the streets like a promise of better days to come. Chief Williams stood on his front porch, watching his son play catch with a group of neighborhood kids who had made accommodations for his limited mobility without being asked. The game was slower than usual, but the joy was just as pure. Dr. Williams joined her husband, slipping her hand into his. "Look at that," she said, nodding toward their son. "He's not just surviving. He's thriving." The fire chief squeezed his wife's hand, his eyes never leaving their son. "He always has been. The rest of us just needed to catch up." As for HOA Cops, he faced multiple charges including assault on a minor, operating without proper licensing, and making false police reports. His court date was set for the following month, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. But the real justice wasn't in his punishment. It was in the transformation of a community that had refused to accept hatred and violence as normal. It was in the new policies that would protect vulnerable children at future events. It was in the conversations happening in homes across the city about inclusion and acceptance. It was in the knowledge that Elijah Williams, an 11-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, had changed his world simply by being himself. 3 months later, when the leaves were turning and the air carried the promise of autumn, Maple Street hosted its first annual Inclusion Festival. The event drew visitors from neighboring cities, all coming to celebrate the neighborhood that had shown the world how to respond to hate with love. Chief Williams was asked to give the opening remarks, but he declined, suggesting instead that the honor go to his son. Elijah took the microphone with steady hands, his voice carrying across the crowd of hundreds who had gathered to celebrate not just his courage, but the courage of an entire community. "When I was little," he began, his words clear and strong, "I used to think that being different was something to be ashamed of. But I learned that being different is what makes the world beautiful." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all united in their commitment to building a better community. "Today, we're not just celebrating a festival," he continued. "We're celebrating the idea that everyone belongs, everyone has value, everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect." The applause was thunderous, but Elijah raised his hand for silence, just as he had seen his father do countless times. "So let's make a promise," he said, his young voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Let's promise that we'll always stand up for each other. Let's promise that we'll never let anyone face hatred alone. Let's promise that we'll build a world where every child feels safe, valued, and loved." The crowd responded with a roar of approval that echoed through the streets of Maple Street and beyond, carrying with it the promise of a better tomorrow built on the foundation of one child's courage and an entire community's love. As the festival continued around them, Chief Williams wrapped his arm around his son's shoulders, both of them watching the celebration of inclusion and acceptance that had grown from seeds of injustice into a garden of hope. "You did good, son," he whispered. Elijah looked up at his father, his eyes bright with the joy of a child who had learned that even in the darkest moments, light could still break through. "We all did good, Dad," he replied. "We all did good." And in that moment, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warmth of community, it was impossible to disagree.